So NTN was recording it and then they'll give you all the tape.
They give you what they want to give.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, they'll be doing a story outside. You can't be live yet, just send me the link. Alright, Jimmy, send me the link. Good afternoon, and welcome to the United Workers' Party press conference, 100 Days of Deceit and Misery, with regard to the current administration's performance in government during these critical first 100 days. My name is Norbert Williams, and I'm the Public Relations Officer of the United Workers' Party. Since the calling into office of this SLP administration, the people of St. Lucia have seen a record rise in COVID-19 numbers and deaths. We have seen gang warfare break out on the streets of St. Lucia. We have seen the unconstitutional confinement of the people of St. Lucia. We have seen a stagnation in the economy of St. Lucia, and we have seen, tantamount to everything else and responsible for everything else, weak leadership in the St. Lucia Labour Party. Today, to speak with you is the Honourable Dominic Fede. He's the former Minister of Tourism and the former representative of Ancillary Canneries. He is currently a senator in the opposition United Workers' Party in the Parliament of St. Lucia. We also have the Honourable Bradley Felix, who is the former Minister of Commerce, and he's the current United Workers' Party opposition senator in the Parliament of St. Lucia, and he is currently the representative for Choiseul Saltibus. Also with us today, we have the Honourable Farah Paulius, former senator and also a current opposition senator in the Parliament of St. Lucia, representing the United Workers' Party. And finally, with us today, we have the Honourable Herod Stanislaus, who is the former Minister of Planning in the United Workers' Party government, the former representative of Soufrière Fonsejac, and he's the current United Workers' Party opposition senator in the Parliament of St. Lucia. First to speak with you today is Dominic Fede, former representative of Ancillary Canneries. Dominic Fede.
Thank you very much, Norbert. I want to say good morning to our listeners, good morning to the head table, my senatorial colleagues, as well as the member for Choiseul representing his constituency proudly in the lower house, Honourable Bradley Felix. The Labour Party's first 100 days, unfortunately, is characterized by deceit and misery. And so as we focus on many topics, this part of my presentation will focus on the mismanagement of COVID-19, which unfortunately has caused many of our loved ones to no longer be with us. On July 27th, the number of COVID-related cases and COVID deaths stood at 88. By November 11th, just 4 months later, an additional 150-odd individuals have died. In other words, over 150 of our loved ones have died in 4 months, compared to 88 in the previous 18 months, or 1.5 years. When we look at the number of COVID cases in total, the Labour Party in 4 short months have doubled what it took the United Workers' Party an entire 18 months to do. Our sympathies go out to those families who have lost loved ones and who are still grieving from the unfortunate mismanagement of the 4th wave of the pandemic. We're not here to play politics with the numbers. We are here to register our concern with this leadership crisis which exists to manage the darkest health crisis our country has seen in its history. And so therefore, the United Workers' Party remains extremely concerned by the lackluster, the lack of direction, the indecisiveness, the flip-flopping, the misleading, the deceit on various issues as it relates to the management of COVID-19. In our view, it appears as if the only science that the St. Lucia Labour Party administration trusts is the science of politics. And so, infected persons were left at home during the fourth wave to fend at least at best as possible at home. Some trying to fend alone or with very little assistance. And they were in the thousands as we saw the lines at the respiratory clinics were very, very long. A family in Viewfort, you may recall, would have lost 4 siblings, all of whom elderly with underlying conditions in the same household. There are many other stories like these, and many other families that are still grieving. Every one of us today that is watching this broadcast knows someone or live next to someone or would have been to school with someone who would have died as a result of COVID-19. This did not have to happen because as we came out of the campaign season for the last elections, the Labour Party should have known that there was going to be a spike and put the necessary systems in place to urgently arrest any eventuality of COVID-19 spiraling out of control. Workplaces are being disrupted as companies experience outbreaks. And you would recall the Chamber of Commerce and the St. Lucia Small Business Association have both pleaded with the government during the last 100 days to implement stiffer measures in response to what both organizations would have sensed as a lackluster, indecisive approach to the management of COVID-19. Bus drivers, police officers tested positive at alarming and unprecedented rates, leaving our health system overwhelmed and our transportation system significantly compromised. Adherence to protocols was left to the goodness of our hearts as we saw the new government chickened out and passed the buck. They shirk from their responsibility to protect and to save our lives because the only thing it appeared that they were willing to protect was their political future. Doctors, nurses, and healthcare providers in the last 100 days were overwhelmed, overworked, and in sometimes simply frustrated. Inadequate resources and supplies at the hospital were stories that became common in the last 100 days. Sadly, the legacy of COVID in their first 100 days in office is one of misery, sickness, death, and mourning. The St. Lucia Labour Party administration, while in opposition, opposed every measure we put in place to safeguard the people's lives and the people's jobs. No matter what we did, the SLP made it wrong. Whether we passed the COVID-19 bill, whether we instituted the state of emergency so that we can limit the movement of people through curfews, it was all politics as usual from the Labour Party. So when they became the government, what did they do? They sought to do the opposite of whatever we did, whether it correlated with the science or not. They wanted to be people pleasers, to be popular. They wanted to ensure that their political future was safeguarded. On the other hand, the United Workers' Party administration always sought to do what was right to save lives and to save jobs, even if it meant that we had to spend political capital, even if it meant that we had to sacrifice our political future on the altar. They claimed we had our knees on the necks of the people. So they went soft. They made light of wearing masks, and they removed the wardens that did a tremendous job in seeking to enforce and to instill discipline in the country. They confined us illegally and treated us like second-class citizens in our own country. I am always baffled to see that the Labour Party that have derided us while we were in government for passing the COVID-19 bill, you would recall that they staged a march, that their senators boycotted the legislative process. We had to cancel the meetings because the Labour Party said that the COVID-19 bill was unconstitutional. They went as far as promising that they would repeal the bill. But it's been 4 months now, and they seem very happy to use the same legislation to manage every aspect of COVID. In fact, now they're celebrating the bill, and they chose to use the COVID-19 bill instead of the state of emergency to enforce emergency powers, a vehicle through which you can institute curfews on an entire nation during a pandemic. It is very interesting, my friends, that the only major change the Labour Party has made to the COVID-19 preparedness bill, prepared by the United Workers' Party, is to change the name of the command center. And so they thought that it would be cute and somehow a name change would have an impact on the number of COVID cases. But history has shown that just changing the name or just putting some makeup or some lipstick on an organization does not cut it. What is required always was, always is, and still will be strong, decisive, and visionary leadership, all of which we see is rather absent from this administration. They closed the bars, but kept big businesses open. And so while thousands of shop owners and people who made their living by selling alcohol across our country, they allowed certain big businesses to operate and to open. Could you imagine the loss of revenue in these small institutions? Could you imagine the economic pain and hardship that this would have brought to many of those families that are self-employed, many of which we give income support while we had to close the country and to close economic activity in the earlier stage of the pandemic? They locked us up while allowing big bus loads of tourists to roam freely through our island on our precious Jeune Creole weekend, showing no respect for our culture. But yet they want to say that they have made it equal for all St. Lucians. They want to say that they have made it equal, that there is not two St. Lucias. But all they have to do now, rightfully, is apologize, because they have betrayed what they promised. They have betrayed what they campaigned on. They said that having two St. Lucias would not happen under them. But yet we see the cruise ship passengers. And the only reason that they have removed the lockdown Sundays is because that video has gone out. And so they cannot say no to the big cruise ship boats that are coming in. And so instead, they pander. They say yes, because you and I are not powerful enough, and our voices are not loud enough for them to give it the respect. But time will tell. When we were in office, friends, you would recall, and I quote Honorable Sean Edwards, we had a well-prepared, first-class COVID-19 plan. And I quote him in a paraphrase manner when he attended the NEMAC meeting to initially launch the plan to manage COVID-19. You know why the then minister, the MP, the then MP and now Education Minister, was impressed because the United Workers' Party set a very stable foundation for the Labour Party. All they had to do now is to change the name of the command center. All they had to do was to put makeup on the organization. We had instituted the respiratory hospital in Victoria Hospital. It was done. We mobilized funds from the World Bank and other institutions so that VH can look the best it has in the last 40 years. We have instituted at one time up to 500 quarantine facilities using at least 7 hotels in this country, so that when St. Lucians coming from abroad and tourists who required quarantining, that we had very good facilities to put them. We instituted and beefed up the testing at the Ezra Long Lab and also at the forensic lab to make sure that we could have dealt with the number of cases that were coming in the increase back in January. From the beginning of the pandemic, we planned ahead and ensured that the Cuban Medical Brigade come to our country and give assistance to our doctors, our nurses, our police officers, our firefighters, and all the frontliners, all of the people who were in the battleground, to make sure that we can fight the COVID-19 pandemic effectively. It didn't happen by accident. When it was required, we made bold decisions. We didn't wait on the science. We were pushed by the science. And even when the science wasn't politically correct, we followed the science at all times. We give regular updates to the nation. You can see the leaders of our government, the Prime Minister, and other members of cabinet were on television constantly updating the nation through this fight of the pandemic, ensuring that our country had a sense of urgency, that our country had a common sense of purpose by which we can fight one of the darkest hours in our history. But what do we see now? We're being told that today the National COVID-19 Management Team have a meeting and the press is barred from attending the meeting. Is this what we're coming to in this country? Is this the society that we want to build, that not even the press, a foundation of our democracy, is not allowed to go and answer questions in an important meeting? We want the frank and full disclosure on COVID, no censorship, no control of the people's voices. Let us be a proud, modern, liberal, 21st century democracy. Allow our press people to come in and ask the questions. But I do ask the question now. Musa and Philip, what is it you have to hide? Why isn't the press allowed to come to the meeting? Why are you now pre-recording tapes? We always allowed the press to come and ask questions because we understood that the press was a very important stakeholder in what we're doing. And so, my friends, I am very sorry to say I am not hopeful about the next 4 years, because if the last 100 days were anything to go by, then, my friends, I tell you, St. Lucia is really gonna see some dark days ahead. And so now they hide. Now they are forced to apologize over and over again when things go wrong. How many times will they have to apologize? Prime Minister Pierre was left blurbering and repeating himself when asked, how was the science different from when the United Workers' Party was in government? Is this why today that you're locking the press out of your meetings? Is it because you want to avoid another embarrassing performance at a press conference? And so we continue this fight to make sure that our society, that the voices of our members are heard in a collective fashion. I thank you very much for your indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Dominic Fede. Folks, we'll take a moment off from the focus of the press conference today and just ask you to remember that yesterday marked the 10th anniversary of the tragedy in Mount Sion, Choiseul, where 17 people lost their lives in that minivan over the cliff. And maybe it's a little ironic that today we see another tragedy, a tragedy of lives lost because of mismanagement of COVID. We see a tragedy of almost economic collapse because of mismanagement. We also see a tragedy in the infringement on the constitutional rights of the people of St. Lucia, where misguidedly this administration has imposed confinement under the guise, under the mistaken notion of using the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Act in the fight against COVID-19. We also see another tragedy where our media people, the press, have been locked out of a press conference today. Ironic, with regard to, or for the government to discuss, the state of COVID-19 in St. Lucia. The invitations were sent out, the emails were sent out, and the information is that on arrival at the location this morning, the press were told that they were not welcome, that they could not enter. Is this the revival of 361? Time will tell. Next at the podium would be the Honorable Herod Stanislaus, former Minister of Planning in the United Workers' Party administration, former representative of Soufrière-Fonsajac, and is the current opposition senator in the Parliament of St. Lucia. He will be discussing the unfulfilled promises of the SLP government. Honorable Stanislaus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the press, colleague members of the head table, St. Lucians at home and in the diaspora. Ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning to all. The current state of affairs in St. Lucia finds us at our darkest moments in the governance of our country under this government. And in the words of Aristotle, it is in our darkest moments that we must focus to see the light. Today, I have to say that it is very disappointing, but not surprising, that Honorable Philip J. Pierre continues to put politics first and has not kept his promises to the people of St. Lucia. After 100 days, Mr. Pierre has failed miserably to deliver on the numerous campaign promises expressed. First, while in opposition, he said that the gas tax was way too high and that fishermen were not using the road and should not have to pay, and so an SLP government would remove the burdensome gas tax on fishermen. This is what he said in his campaign promises, that he will remove the gas tax because it was too burdensome on the fisher folks of St. Lucia. They have been meeting with the fishermen, and even this past week, they met with the fishermen of Soufrière. No mention was made of the removal of the gas tax to the fishermen. What has changed, Mr. Prime Minister? It is over 100 days now, and the fishermen are waiting for the removal of the burdensome gas tax. Today, we see that words of political trickery and deception skillfully administered during the campaign are not the best therapy for the people of St. Lucia. Ladies and gentlemen, political promises and vows were made during the campaign between candidates and voters to win votes. But now, how quickly the SLP government have forgotten and failed to honor them. Mr. Pierre, while preaching on the political platforms, said that government was withholding the people's money in income tax refunds. He made it seem that it was a deliberate effort on the part of the United Workers' Party government at the time not to give income tax refunds. And so, what did he do? In his attempt to persuade the public to vote for the SLP, he promised the people of St. Lucia that if elected within the first 100 days, and I repeat, the first 100 days, he will refund everyone who is owed $5,000 or less their money. Mr. Pierre, Mr. Prime Minister, where is the income tax refund? Many people from Soufrière and all over this country need that little kakada. They need their refund. And so I urge you, Honorable Prime Minister, to keep your promises to the people of St. Lucia and give the people their money. Give the people of St. Lucia their tax refund money. It's over 100 days. Then again, was it all a bluff? And did we expect him to keep to that promise? The people of St. Lucia know the truth of the answer to that question. Honorable Pierre in the politics made promises that he cannot keep, and this is a stark example of the last 100 days of the Labour Party in government. I am happy to have been part of the last UWP administration that kept its commitment to the people and implemented a historic income support program for over 15,000 displaced workers and another 6,000 self-employed and small business persons, where taxi drivers, vendors, bar owners, and others all benefited. But what did Mr. Pierre say to that? Back in opposition, he said that the $500 a month was not enough. And if elected, an SLP government would give $1,500 a month to the people. He made that statement not once, but at least twice. Why? Because he wanted the votes of the people of St. Lucia, putting politics first, dressed in the campaign language of political promises. What has happened since being in office? St. Lucians all over know what he did. He looked at St. Lucians squarely in the face on national television and radio and vehemently denied ever saying that. But when the tapes were played, he said that's not what he meant. Bluff, bluff, bluff. And more bluff again from Honorable Pierre, the Honorable Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, we have never seen so much lockdown in the first 100 days of any government. Small bars and restaurants have been shut down for weeks. Where is the much needed stimulus for the people, Mr. Prime Minister? Where is the promise of $1,500 for the single mothers and those small struggling vendors, taxi drivers, and bus drivers? Where is the money you promised? Don't the people deserve that money now, as you boldly stated on the campaign trail? The UWP calls on Prime Minister Philip J. Pierre to give the people the money. You are in government. You are not new to governance. You are an experienced politician, an experienced Minister of Government, and you are now the Minister of Finance. We call on you to give the people of St. Lucia their well-deserved $1,500 a month. They need this money to pay their electricity and water bills. They need it to send their children to school. They need it to feed the children. This is not the time for bluff and flashing mirrors. It is time to deliver, and the people are still waiting. Sadly, broken promises have become a fundamental feature of Honorable Philip J. Pierre and his administration. Clearly, the political doctrine of the St. Lucia Labour Party was not about caring for the people. It was not about putting the people first. They are not thinking of the people. They are merely rearranging their partisan prejudices. And how it is clear that the political leopard cannot change its spots of victimization, oppression, ill treatment, abuse, and political favoritism. So believe me when I tell you that this SLP administration has done nothing but sow political seeds of deceit and misery in the last 100 days. It is well known that infertile seeds will not sprout if the soil factors, the political ground temperature, the pH, the salinity, and leadership are not favorable for government's performance to sprout. The UWP gives this government an F grade, a failing grade, in its first 100 days in office. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Herod Stanislas. Next in the lineup, folks, as we're rolling along, is the Honorable Bradley Felix, who's the former Minister of Commerce in the United Workers' Party administration, and is current opposition senator in our House of Parliament. Oh, you're not a senator. Representative, member, pardon me, in the lower house. And he's a representative for Choiseul Saltibus. He'll be talking about the economic collapse. Honorable Bradley Felix.
Thank you, Mr. Pierre. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, brothers and sisters in diaspora. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My apologies. You know, I sat in the last administration, and many of you are very aware that at every parliament session, every single parliament session that we attended, the members opposite then, who now all make up the government, spoke continuously of victimization. It was a word mentioned at every single parliament session. The perceived victimization that they felt was being handed down to supporters of the St. Lucia Labour Party. In fact, every word was used to describe the then Prime Minister. Words such as cruel, cold, heartless, when they spoke about the perceived victimization. The then leader of the opposition, Honorable Philip Pierre, indicated that he would approach things differently. If elected, he would be a prime minister of inclusion. What have we seen? Were these words of bluff? They even went as far as to have a slogan, putting the people first. Was that a slogan of deception? You will recall and you will remember when our Prime Minister then spoke of the balancing act of lives and livelihoods. The opposition then condemned the Prime Minister for the use of that expression. And now we hear every single member on the government side using that word of lives and livelihoods. What have we seen? We have seen, brothers and sisters, in recent times, the firing of hundreds of workers. What have we seen in the last 100 days, brothers and sisters? In the last 100 days, we continue to see an unfortunate stoppage of major projects intended to improve our ailing infrastructure and create much needed jobs. We have seen St. Jude's Hospital stop. We have seen the Rodney Bay Roundabout project stop. We have seen the Talvan Housing Project stop. We have seen the Shock Housing Project stop. And people who have been familiar and who have passed while these projects were ongoing would recall seeing many young men with red armbands on these projects in an attempt to go after contractors perceived to be supporters of the United Workers' Party. They have sacrificed their very own supporters. What seems to be the trend is that certain contractors who are well-known supporters of the SLP see their projects go unhindered. On the other hand, small contractors, just because they exercise their constitutional right and voted for the United Workers' Party, have seen their contracts either delayed or stopped. We have lost dozens of jobs overnight as the SLP administration puts politics first. The global pandemic has created a gaping hole in the number of jobs generated locally. To bring relief to construction workers and their families, it was part of our strategy, whilst in government, to create as many construction jobs as possible, so that displaced waiters, bartenders, hotel employees, while being laid off, taxi drivers not getting the normal trips, they could find an alternative job from the many projects we were doing. Now, this is not an option for many of these people looking for jobs. Industries like the tourist industry is still not back to what we saw pre-COVID levels. Just imagine how a vendor could have gotten a job on many of our road projects. Now that the SLP has stopped these projects, these employees are left with no jobs, no hope. This is what 100 days of deceit and misery does to our people. But this is just half of the story. Half of the story that we have seen in the last 100 days. A number of small contractors who have executed small government contracts under the various programs are still not paid after months of completing their projects. I am calling on the SLP administration to put politics aside and pay the contractors their monies. Imagine a contractor from the Dennery village or the Choiseul Saltibus area who is without a pension and has completed his project 4 months ago, but yet cannot be paid. This is creating even more pain to our people, creating tremendous hardship to our people, particularly in this time where monies from the diaspora are limited because of their own difficulties being faced by family and friends overseas. What have we seen, brothers and sisters? They indicated during their time in opposition that our government was focusing on family, friends, and foreigners. What have we seen? We now see they're focusing on family, friends, and cliques. So it is the plight of the people that we come here to give a voice to ensure that their rights and their freedoms are not trampled upon by the painful policies of the current administration. Only this morning, we heard of the treatment of the press. Can you even fathom this under a UWP administration?
No way.
Brothers and sisters, it is my view that the last 100 days has been nothing but deception, misery, and hardship on our people. I ask our people, brothers and sisters, many of you may have made the wrong choice, but it is not too late to speak out on what is affecting you. You are a St. Lucian with a voice, and you have a right to be heard. Let your voices be heard. Let the current government lean on the promises made to the people. Put the pressure as they continue to say, the people come first. Let the government recognize that the people are first. Without the people, there is no government. I thank you, brothers and sisters.
Thank you, the Honorable Bradley Felix, representative for Choiseul Saltibus. Coming up next, we have the Honorable Ferropolius, former senator and current senator in the Opposition United Workers' Party in our House of Parliament, the Honorable Ferropolius.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and colleagues at the head table, members of the press, all those who are following us via Facebook, Sky FM, all those who are riding on the Flabo train. Thank you. It's a beautiful day. It is indeed a beautiful day. Despite the misery, the deceit of the St. Lucia Labour Party, we will rise. Fellow St. Lucians, for the first 100 days of the Labour Party in office, it's no secret that many of you are either bawling, crying in silence, or feel so embarrassed that you can't even utter a word. Many of you expected better based on the promises made to you during the election campaign. Instead, you have been fooled by the lies and deceitfulness of the Labour Party. This Labour Party government continues to put politics first and foremost, and is primarily concerned with taking care of its own friends, families, and cliques. Pendant yon 100 jours, depuis parti Labour formé gouvernement, sa pa pièce sigwe, nous tous savent, la ni plusieurs Saint-Lucien qui ka souffert. Yo ka plewe, yo ka rouclé en silence. Yo te kwe ki, c'est pour mettre la parti Labour te bayo durant élection, bagay te kay vini primaire. En chay Saint-Lucien, twape koyo kwene pa parti Labour, parce que tout ça, yo te ka di, le yo te en opposition, yo ka fait un différent bagay yo ka fait même bagay la yo te ka critiquer gouvernement flambeau pour deceit, lies, bluffs, fooling you, St. Lucians. Les enchailles Saint-Lucien réfléchis. Yo igwete décision yo te fait pour électer parti les bas en disant temps qui autant critique en temps Covid. Là où réfléchit. Et puis l'année dedans, un chai supporter les bas partis. Yo a réalisé ça. Mais yo pas vle rive bouche yo ek di rien. Whatever they have drunk, whatever they were given to keep them quiet, very soon the words will erupt from their mouths and they will speak. The United Workers' Party rebukes the Labour Party for the manner in which it has treated and victimized several workers during their first 100 days in office. It takes a heartless and insensitive government to terminate the contracts of workers whom they believe did not support them in the last general election, at a time when those workers are most vulnerable. The Labour Party went on a rampage to fire hard-working people and professionals who performed their duties professionally and with integrity, only to be replaced, in some instances, by labor hacks who lack the decorum, the competence, and sound work ethics. Mr. Prime Minister, how can you celebrate when the contracts of many single mothers like Jennifer from Dennery North, who is trained and holds a CVQ certification in elderly care, how can you celebrate when those contracts have been terminated? How can you celebrate when the livelihoods of council workers all over St. Lucia have been grossly affected by a callous and vengeful Labour Party representation? Ou parti vote ban nou ka fire. This is the mindset of the Labour Party and most of the persons who are now placed in certain positions. How do you explain, Mr. Prime Minister, the premature termination of a home caregiver supervisor in Castries right under your nose? Her contract is due to end in March of 2022, next year. How do you explain that to the people of St. Lucia? How can your members, the members of your cabinet and friends and your cliques, raise their glasses to a drink when many construction workers, and you heard it, you have heard it before, many of those construction workers have not been paid for projects that they have completed for months now. How do you beat your chest and say that you have accomplished? Mr. Prime Minister, When will the former Castries City Council workers be paid? When will they be paid? They were supposed to have been paid within 7 days following termination of the contract, as indicated on the dismissal letter dated August 30th, 2021. And of course, in accordance with Section 46 of the Labour Act. Why the delay, Mr. Prime Minister and Minister responsible for housing? Why the delay? Fellow St. Lucians, the Labour Party is so politically blind and deaf and indifferent to the economic situations of some that it can neither see nor hear the cries of all St. Lucians, particularly those who did not buy into their agenda. We call on the Prime Minister and his cabinet to listen to the cries of all by putting an end to this victimization and vindictiveness in Castries Southeast, Dennery North, Castries Central, Saltibus, Choiseul, and other constituencies. Please, we ask that you exercise fairness with the workers of Fair Helen. Not some, all the workers of this country. This anti-victimization position that you held when you were in opposition, Mr. Prime Minister, let that be mirrored in your governance and leadership of this country. Admit that you and your troop have made a false start. However, we are of the conviction that there is room for your administration to set things right with the workers of this country. We call upon you, Mr. Prime Minister, and your troop to listen to the cries of St. Lucians, not some, not just those who supported you, all of them, and lead this country. Put an end to the victimization that currently exists in this country.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, the Honorable Farah Polius. We will now take some questions from the press. You have a few questions. Okay.
The question on everyone's mind is, when should the country expect him back home, and in relation to his transfer of his office.
And you're from which
HTS,
news house?
sorry.
HTS. Question from HTS. When will the leader of the opposition take up his office? And
Well, when will he be back?
when will he be back?
And can you speak to him moving his office? I know just talk about him moving his office.
And the moving of his office. Yes.
Can you speak on that?
Which office?
Well, the
Is the office of the leader of the opposition is not moving from, but Bradley Felix.
What I can assure the press is that the Prime Minister will be at the next Parliament session, which is expected to be Tuesday coming. So we can rest assured he will be present. With regards to the move, I think it's a choice that any party can make to move to any place that they feel comfortable. High Street, if I passed High Street only this morning, it is impossible to get parking on High Street. We also are aware, we have seen news items in the past where because of the location of the leader of the opposition office, the number of break-ins we had in that particular area. So I think it's a choice. I don't think the move is costing the Parliament any additional monies. And I think it's an office, while it is the leader of the opposition office, it's an office that can be used by myself, by the senators, and so we think the convenience of parking is paramount. Thank you.
Thank you. We have any other questions from DBS? We have some questions via social media. I was looking at them a while ago. We have, first we'll take 3 questions from social media. Number 1 is directed to Senator Ferropolius. It says, you were derided by the housing minister for your statements on the rent for CDC housing. Has your position changed? Did you make a statement on that? Ferropolius.
The statement that I made at our last press conference has not changed, despite the ridicule, despite the comments made by the minister responsible for housing. If you were to go back to the statement, you listen again, you would realize that I commended the minister for such an intervention, such an initiative. However, I made a suggestion, and anyone can make a suggestion. There are many different ways to address an issue. And as an individual and leader, an educator, I think divergently. So there was nothing wrong in the suggestion that I made. What I emphasized, and I will continue to emphasize, is that there is need to extend the very same measure across the board. And not just when it is convenient to any minister or to any government. And I maintain that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Ferropolius. Now, second of 3 questions from social media, which is, this one's directed at Senator Herod Stanislaus. Do you believe it is fair to ask the government to do so much, to fix so much in 100 short days? That's a question from social media.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Moderator. I believe it is very fair, it's a very fair question of me to ask the Honorable Prime Minister and government to deliver to the people of St. Lucia what they promised in opposition. Because the Prime Minister and many of his colleagues in cabinet, they're not new to governance. This is not the first time in the governance of this country. And they knew very well the fiscal position of St. Lucia whilst they were in opposition. They knew the revenue intake, they knew the expenditure, and they knew what COVID had done to this economy, and yet still they went out there and made all those promises to the people of St. Lucia. So it is very fair for me to ask them to deliver on their promises to the people of St. Lucia, because they are not new to government. They understood what the fiscal position was prior to coming into government, and so they have to keep their words and give the people the money. Find the money, make the money, borrow the money, give the people the money.
Thank you very much, Honorable Herod Stanislaus. Many of those promises, folks, which were made by the current administration, then opposition, were promises to deliver within the first 100 days. Promises to deliver $5,000 and less, which were owed to the taxpayers of St. Lucia, to deliver on that. And many, many other promises. And the final question from social media is directed at Senator Dominic Fede. What is your reaction to the return of Air Canada and Virgin Atlantic to St. Lucia?
Thank you, Norbert. I think that St. Lucia would know very well that we have been talking to both Air Canada and Virgin Atlantic for quite some time. What we wanted to do was to make sure that whatever deal we had with the airlines were a deal that was fair. We believe that we've marketed the destination sufficiently, and we've reached a stage where we no longer have to depend on paying airlines to fly to St. Lucia, because our brand is strong, our people is strong, our destination is strong, and our product is strong. And so that was our philosophy. In the case of Air Canada, they never really stopped flying to St. Lucia. So the St. Lucia Labour Party should stop pretending like they had anything to do with it. Basically, the Canadian border was closed for the most part of the pandemic, and they required Canadians traveling abroad to be able to get vaccinated, or if not vaccinated, they had to return and quarantine. And so the 2-week quarantine on the way back proved to be prohibitive for travel, and so therefore Air Canada did not find it very profitable to be able to fly. So it wasn't because of the genius of the St. Lucia Labour Party, it was simply because of travel restrictions back in Canada that Air Canada was not flying to St. Lucia. But they've been flying to St. Lucia for many, many years. In fact, during the United Workers' Party administration, the stats will show that Air Canada did increase its air capacity to St. Lucia. That's why we saw growth and growth from the Canadian market. And we're very happy that Air Canada is back. But the SLP administration ought to stop pretending like they did anything magnificent. This is just a routine return of an airline that was grounded because of COVID. One would see a similar thing happening in the UK market, and of course it's a little better now that we're on the green list. You would see that gradually British Airways will be ramping up its flights. Before we left office, they had already announced that they were flying from Heathrow Airport starting in December with several rotations, and all of that was agreed upon. And I hope that when the Heathrow flight starts with British Airways in a month's time, that the St. Lucia Labour Party will not pretend as though they did something about it. But I'm very happy for the tourism workers of the country. I'm very happy for the industry, the hotel industry and the tourism industry, the workers especially. They've been going through a lot with not being able to pay their bills as a result of the pandemic, with being laid off, and it was just a whole series of hopelessness. And I'm so happy that so many people are back at work. And let's put the politics aside and let's govern the country. Say thank you to the UWP for leaving you a very good foundation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll take one final question from social media, and this one's directed to the Honorable Bradley Felix. The SLP has claimed that the UWP left them with over $100 million in payables. How can they pay the contractors in a timely fashion?
Thanks for that question. What I could tell you, and I will speak particularly for my case as the parliamentary rep for Shrewsbury Saltibus, and one of the reasons my project started very late was that the personnel at the Ministry of Economic Planning were very meticulous to say when to start. And they would only indicate to start, and they only gave me that green light when the funds were available. So these funds were there. That's right. The question we would ask is whether the timing was right when the SLP government came into power to provide the National Trust with $750,000. That's right. Whether the timing was right to do cosmetic changes to the Prime Minister's office in terms of painting it and stuff like that. That's right. And whether they should have paid money for people to cut coconut branches to go and block people's houses in Soufrière because of a cruise ship. These are the questions we need to ask. Whether the money that have been spent so far have been spent wisely rather than paying the debts that are outstanding. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you very much, folks. And we've come to the end of this press conference. 100 Days of Deceit and Misery. The United Workers' Party would encourage all persons in St. Lucia to continue following the protocols and to be safe. Thank you very much.